But as I reflected on it with them, did I understand the mining industry? Did I understand what being a geologist, geophysicist meant for me postgraduate? And I think there's a lot in that. So someone who studies dentistry or studies medicine more broadly or studies accounting, do they really understand what that means their work's going to be like?
Welcome to Voices of Gender Equity, the podcast where we deep dive into real and raw stories of impact. I'm your host, Ashley McGrath, and each episode I'm aiming to inspire and influence you, our listeners, into action by bringing you authentic conversations, success stories and practical advice. Join us as we amplify the voices of individuals from all walks of life. Activists, scholars, CEOs and everyday champions, sharing their journeys, insights and strategies for driving meaningful change. So, whether you're a seasoned advocate or just beginning to explore this fascinating topic, Voices of Gender Equity is your space to listen, learn and engage. Welcome to the conversation. Welcome to Voices of Gender Equity, real and raw stories of impact. Joining us on today's episode is Brendan Harris. Brendan is the Chief Executive Officer of Sandfire, one of the largest copper-focused companies on the Australian Securities Exchange. So Brendan, we know your name, we know where you work, but I'd love for you to, set the scene for our guests and share a little bit more about who is Brendan Harris.
Thanks, Ash. Nice to be here. I'm a bit nervous now. It's almost, I know where you live. Hopefully this goes well then. It is a pleasure to be here. I'll tell you a bit about myself. I grew up in Adelaide. My parents originally are from Port Lincoln, which is on the coastal town fringes of the west coast of South Australia. Very beautiful area, pristine. I said to someone yesterday, it's known for its tuna fishing and great white sharks. But a great place to grow up outdoors. And Adelaide was a wonderful, wonderful town to go through school and university. I've got a brother. He's here in Western Australia as well. He's deeply entrenched in the mining industry and someone I've followed, I guess, as a shining light throughout my career. And then I've got 3 children, a lovely wife, Jade. We met in Sydney. We actually met at work. So there's something interesting in that. Not in the same reporting line, but it's interesting in the context of, it's an ongoing debate as well.
Yes.
That was when we were at Macquarie Bank in Sydney. And then we had 3 lovely children. We like to challenge ourselves. 3 children in 3 years. Holly was born in Sydney.
Wow.
Chloe was born in Melbourne and Henry was born in Chelsea and London.
You two are glutton for punishment, aren't you?
Yeah, and we survived it so far. And but definitely an amazing experience. But that I look back sometimes and really reflect on how challenging it must have been. When you're in the moment, as you know, you just sort of move forward. I'm very lucky. Jade's been incredibly supportive, and obviously I'm incredibly fortunate to have someone like her, who's there for me.
Bless you. That's amazing. I've learned a lot already, which is great. Thank you for setting the scene there. And I'm sure some of those experiences might come into kind of what we're going to talk about today. But I'd love to kick off just by, asking you, you're such, an amazing advocate for true gender equity, and we love having you and Team Sandfire on board at CGE. But I'd love to kind of go back and ask, was there a defining moment or a certain experience in your career which had really, ignited this passion that you have for gender equity?
Yeah, look, I speak on quite a few panels. It's interesting though. I struggle when people say I'm a wonderful advocate because, and perhaps it's a bit about who I am and how I'm wired. I'm always thinking about what I'm not doing. And to be honest with you, I don't feel like I ever do enough. The old saying, there's only 24 hours in a day, but, there's so many areas of life and business where you really feel like you're probably touching the veneer and there's so much more we need to do. And it's why people like yourself, in the area you are so important because you're really working hard to make a difference for all of us. Look, there's a range of experiences over time. I think a couple that really come to mind. So when I was in Sydney in the financial services industry, and this is not specific to the financial services industry, it was just where I was at the time. Very client-focused business, so, high octane, hard-working, but very client-focused, and at least the area that I specialised in. And I saw a number of young women, come into the business. I worked with some of them, and they would move through into different phases of their life, move away and have children, and moving on to parental leave, and losing that client interface. And what I saw happen regularly was, as they'd come back into the workplace, if there was a redundancy process, that they were often the top of the list.
Like out of sight, out of mind kind of thing?
Well, there is a reality of the value to the business was your client relationships. You step away, other people step in. They take over those relationships. They forge those relationships. But I found that to be a really confronting process. And so people who work with me now and have worked with me in recent years would know that I just have like a rule of thumb, which is not on my watch. I think that's an area that we fundamentally need to do better. And then probably if I think more broadly, and we'll undoubtedly touch on this, working with Michelle King in London, she was an incredible support for me. She was my human resources business partner, and I'm acting as though everyone knows Michelle King because I probably assume they do. She is a true advocate for gender equity. She's written now 2 books. I think she's on her 3rd, acclaimed author. And she really works at it from the bottom-up perspective of understanding the key drivers of inequality in the workplace. So she was a wonderful, support for me and influential person. But it's through that time, when I was moving over to London with my employer at the time, and, I recognised there was like all new jobs, there's a challenge, and I needed specific support. And there was a woman who worked with me. I hadn't known that long, but I really just could tell she had exceptional capability and potential. And she'd lived in London before, and I felt that if I could encourage her to move with me and move her family with my family across to London and be arguably my critical support, and that we could build a team together, we'd be successful. But I needed that. But what I noticed was, despite all of those traits, that she seemed to have been passed up for that level of promotion. And there may have been good reasons. I'm not judging it, but it was interesting to me that for whatever reason, despite her incredible work ethic and clear capability, and the fact that she'd worked in numerous areas, she hadn't managed to move up to that VP level. And I said to her, well, and in a way I feel, to some degree guilty of this because it's a bit self-interested in hindsight. If you come, I will do everything I can to make sure, one, we together are successful, but you'll get recognised, that you'll get promoted. So I'm pleased to say, and I'm sure if she was here, she might correct me on timing. I think within 2 years of her moving to London with me, she was promoted to VP, and she's been very successful. And I think all of the potential and capability I saw has been borne out in what she's done. Her work ethic is beyond anything I've seen. But I find it remarkable that it took that long. And I go back to Michelle King, and one of the things she talks about in her book, I think it's The Fix, which it's about fixing workplaces. It's not about fixing women.
Love it. Fix
in a
the
generic
system.
sense. Yeah. Is the importance that men often talk about mentorship, and we often talk about male role models and so on. She talks about allyship. And without knowing it, if I reflect on it, that's what I was doing. Now, yes, there's probably a level of self-interest in it, or identification of a need, but then it was real allyship of, not only am I going to mentor and support, I want to be there to actively promote her.
That's right.
And I think there's something in that for all of us as leaders, male or female, and perhaps particularly for men, if we're going to bring that next generation of female leaders, foster them, bring them into the business and help them grow, we've got to move beyond just being mentors or coaching to actively getting engaged in their careers and actually making sure people are successful and getting recognised and helping them move through the system.
It's that next step, isn't it? It's not just being a sounding board, giving advice. It's actually, it's kind of the same concept that we describe as sponsorship. So you're actively creating opportunities, and you're talking about people when they're not in the room. It's that next level, isn't it? And
I think it's actively promoting, and it's in the figurative sense and the literal. You're right. Recognising people, irrespective of their cultural background, i.e. ethnicity, or their gender, recognising them for their potential, being mindful of one's unconscious biases, but then when they deliver, being willing to take the next step and actively promote them, i.e. through allyship, to make sure that they're recognised. And I'm not suggesting I've done that perfectly through my career. I guarantee you I haven't. But we're all learning every day. That's one of those moments I look back on my career that just made me think a little differently.
It's funny you say that, because I've actually been reflecting a little bit about this recently and kind of practice what I preach, with sponsorship myself, because I was sponsored into this role at CGE, and that's just changed my life. I just can't believe that. So I'm trying to practice what I preach. But for me, so I've been, as an example, trying to, sponsor my team for opportunities. So instead of me going to events, I'm sponsoring, Henry, and I'm getting Kelly to lead certain things, and I'm trying to take a step back for exactly that reason. Yeah. But for me, upon reflecting on it, it just kind of comes back to the basics of leadership, where ideally you want your team, you want to develop people to take your job and to do a better job than you, and yet you can't do that by it's just all about you. It's about empowering, and actively giving those people opportunities, and rather than you just going in and that's just the easy thing. It's
I think
basics.
I think that's right. I mean, we all talk about it generically, that leadership's about people, but most of us, unless we're very fortunate, often by luck, we don't get a lot of training about, well, how do you manage people? How do you support people? How do you develop people? We actually generally exercise that muscle and learn through experience, which really means through making mistakes. And, I look back across my career, and it took me a long time to realise that no one's perfect, but I probably have an element of seeking perfection, or being a perfectionist. And I recognise that's probably taken a toll on me at times, but it's probably taken a toll on people who've worked with me. My expectations, I'm sure, I look back, were unrealistic at times. It's about, I think, recognising as you get older, the things that have helped you be successful, often your greatest strengths, also your greatest weaknesses, and trying to build that level of balance. But I think it's just that mindset. Graham Kerr at South 32, who you know very well, he often would talk to me and say, well, you're very coachable. And I think that's one thing that I'd encourage in all of these elements, is the degree to which we give time. None of us have time. How do we have time to reflect and then learn and get better? I don't think that journey ever stops.
No, 100%, especially whenever you're trying to lead, but also drive this, really important, gender equity. It's societal level change. It's when we do small things, the impact is incredible.
It is, but I like what you say there, because if we look at a lot of elements of business now, and the things we're looking for business to do, it's well beyond what we would have normally put in the typical remit. It is societal. It's global. If you think about climate change, if you think about the environment more broadly, regulation, biodiversity, water, gender equity, these are things that the world is increasingly realising really matter. And so the bar's just continuing to rise, and that creates a lot of challenge. I think, we look at the mining industry, and one of the challenges, particularly here in Australia, it's different in Botswana and Spain where we operate. There are different challenges, of course, but we know labour's been very tight, which is driving significant inflationary pressures, both in an operating sense and in a project or capital development sense. And as an industry, we haven't had the best brand for a long period of time for a number of reasons. And I think we're working hard at it. I think some of the campaigns the big companies have run have been really powerful. But we need to appeal to that broader, diverse workforce. We need to be having access to the greatest pool of talent. We're a wonderful employer in this country. The jobs that people can do, the experiences they can have, the ability to travel the world, the technology that we're putting to work or bringing to bear, it's quite unique. It's a great place to be. So right at the grassroots, how do we attract more people? And I think it has to start with getting that narrative right around not only is it a good place to work, but it's a good place for everyone to work.
And yeah, there has been some, good campaigns around that. But definitely, I think we need more, because you're right. Like whenever you talk about it, it's like, wow, like mining, it's like dynamic and the technology, and it's incredible, and like the impact, for Australians, and like the broader impact, than yourself and your company. It's so important to our country and so exciting. But I think as an example, I heard this research about, there's a big push to get more women in engineering. And when they dug into why more women don't pursue careers in engineering, the bottom line is that they don't know what engineering really involves, right? Because if you look at women, for example, women, as a broad generalization, are generally motivated by purpose, and impact. And so...
deep meaning.
Yeah, exactly. But that's not coming across at the minute. You just think engineers, and they're not connecting the two. Whereas I heard this really amazing radio ad by ECU recently, which was just, it just came on all of a sudden. It was like, do you want to change the world through, reducing the, climate, the climate temperature? Do you want to, change recycling by, building buildings with recycled, plastic bottles, whatever? And then it was like, really got your attention. It's like, study engineering at ECU. It was like, wow. Yeah. Okay. So I think it's like a similar thing with the mining industry.
To do similar things about travel the world, and it's funny you mentioned that. Someone asked me only recently about geology, geophysics, and why I studied it was because I love the earth, and I love being outdoors, and the physical made more sense to me than the if you like, the theoretical. But as I reflected on it with them, did I understand the mining industry? Did I understand what being a geologist, geophysicist meant for me postgraduate? And I think there's a lot in that. So someone who studies dentistry or studies medicine more broadly or studies accounting, do they really understand what that means their work's going to be like, what their opportunity set's going to be like before they start? And I think we can do, particularly in the mining industry, because we have such a powerful story to tell that can appeal to everyone. I think, it's a fair call. We can do better. That's why I think some of the campaigns that have been run that are really helping people understand that, at least I believe, that without mining we don't have anything.
Yeah.
We don't have this. None of this.
Yeah.
Without mining and or forestry, if we look around us.
That's right.
How do we do it sustainably? How do we do it well? How do we bring innovation, technology? How do we decarbonise? And then if you think about the decarbonisation journey, it's a massive challenge, but it's one that we're going to need everyone involved in. But again, without mining, we can't decarbonise. So that's what gets me out of bed in the morning. It really excites me. But I think, if you go back to many of the discussions you and I have had, I think when we get to the discussion of equity or gender equity specifically, it can be a very emotive topic. And if I reflect on many of the discussions I've had over the last decade, I actually think that's one of the biggest challenges. Because often you go to forums, you go to the big events, and people understandably are pounding the table. And this was a really poignant time. You asked about some of the critical moments for me. One of them a good number of years ago, sitting on a global panel within one of the corporates I was working with our chair at the time and other leaders around the organisation. And the discussion coming from women in Africa, coming from women elsewhere in up into Asia, etc., that we had on this in this forum was that nothing's really changed in 20 to 30 years. In other words, the same conversations were being had. And again, that leads to the pounding of the table because there's a level of impatience. But when I reflected on it, again, just my perspective, I think that's one of the greatest challenges is if you bring emotion and it's pounding the table like, we just need to do it. Do what? And I think a good number of people in recent times have sort of connected that question to the safety journey.
Yeah.
We knew as an industry, a heavy industry, where if we don't have good control, we have risk. How do we can say, let's stop hurting people, but by doing what? And if you look at the mining industry as a case study, I think it's done so many things building in systems and control to fundamentally improve the safety of working within our industry, our sector. We still have a way to go, but that's been a fundamental step change. And as we went out and then spoke to all of our people about, well, what are we going to do to actually make sure that in the next 10 years, there's not a different group of people here having the same conversation? It was what came back and what really became apparent is we needed to do very similar things and put building blocks in place, which is actual specific action, if you like, at the granular system or systemic level.
Nice. Yeah.
Rather than platitudes or initiatives that have things. Parental leave policies are really important, but it's like an initiative.
Yeah.
It's not going to drive fundamental long-term change.
No, that in itself, absolutely
that in itself won't do it. So
Yeah.
what are you doing in the same way we thought about safety? What are you doing to try and build various elements into the way you work?
The way you think, the way you talk.
The way you think, the way I like to think about it, if I get it right, is it's from the hiring process, the onboarding process, to the facilities you work in, the exit processes, and everything in between. In other words, it has to be holistic.
The whole employee life cycle has to be
holistic.
considered.
But it's the employee life cycle, including the facilities you provide, the facilities people work in, the physical and the the environment that's created. And I'm not going to sit here saying that's a job well done. It's a process of change, but it is building policies in around, well, how do you require, just as we'd have minimum standards for safety, that in an interview process, how do you create policies or requirements that dictate how people have to look at that broader pool?
Yeah.
In other words, one of the great examples that was developed in a former employee that I work with is ensuring that in the final interview process, you have gender balance in that pool.
Nice.
Pick the best person.
Yeah.
Always pick the best person, but make sure it's forcing you to think broadly within the broader talent pool.
Love that.
Facilities, I talk a lot about. We rightly in mining realise we need to upgrade female facilities. For obvious reasons. A lot of the environments, particularly out on the mine sites, were originally developed for male workforces.
That's right.
But my reflection was we often talk about moving away from the football club culture. I think in the Royal Commission here there was a lot of discussion around that. The reality is if we want to move away from that, we've got to make sure that men aren't using facilities that are reflective of a football club or a prison. And so how do we make sure we upgrade their facilities so we make sure even within the male population there's a broader if you like, appeal to people from different backgrounds and so on. So I think it's all of those things, and as I say, everything in between. But it's to me, it's that real action at the granular level. Yes, you need the top down, you need a bit of emotion and energy, but if that's all it is, and it's only bite-sized initiatives, you're probably not going to make the change.
100%. And it's a great point you raise, which has come through the findings of my PhD so far, is that, like the best solutions to gender equity are the ones which everyone benefits from. So it seems so basic, but the provision of appropriate ablution facilities is actually really high up on what the 5 companies I'm talking to are claiming is helping to drive change. And like you said, like when these companies have mainly done some kind of like audit, yeah, some of them have found like, yeah, there's either none or not appropriate facilities for women, right? But as they've done an audit of all of the ablutions, the men's toilets are feral, or they don't have regular cleaning cycles, or they've got one shower head with 4 showers. Like,
Well, so most of the
right?
mines that I've been to, most of these, built decades ago, they're common showering facilities.
Yeah.
Again, where do you find those? When I was growing up, at least, that's the football club, and as someone said to me, it's prison. I haven't fortunately
That's right.
experienced that to this point. But
this
but the reality is, it's that's that environment,
Yeah.
the precise environment that we're saying we want to move away
That's
from.
right.
So that's why I think it's looking holistically. Yes, we need to make sure there's the appropriate female facilities on site. That's a given, but it hasn't been. But let's make sure we look at the whole equation.
Because then by doing that, you're not kind of ostracizing, the women are getting all the, the fancy new facilities. It's no, let's fix this for everyone.
Well, it may be part of that. I think it's the broader piece of let's make sure we look at the holistic solution so that within the, you've got ideally more women and more men in the equation over time from broader cultural backgrounds. So taking it's not just gender, it's that broader piece.
Yeah.
You're not going to achieve that if you only solve one side of the equation. And I think, but equally, again, if you look at the way in which we need to think differently, it's as we start driving, if you like, processes that deliver better, improving gender equity, one of the risks we run is we then put one person over here, one person over here, and one person over here. And we say, look, we're getting better. But the reality for the people who are moving into the workplace, they're not experiencing any diversity whatsoever. And so this other element of how do you, over time, say, all right, well, as we're bringing people in, how do we create teams that are almost the champion teams of gender diversity? Because my suspicion is as we do that more, not only will that mean more people stick because they'll experience things differently, but we're also then enabling people to be themselves. They don't have to assimilate to a team that's not diverse.
That's right.
But if you believe the theory and from what I've seen, those teams will probably over time outperform as well because of their environment, their inclusive, diverse environment, which will then help prosecute and propagate change.
That's right.
So I think that's what, to me, it's one needs to have a very clear intent, but you need to then step back and look at what are the actual elements of work and the way you set work up to actually not only deliver change, sustain change, and then, I guess, prove that change is delivering the outcomes that you're aiming for. Because then I think it becomes self-reinforcing. But I think personally, my own journey as a leader, we're early in that process. And there are different challenges depending on the countries in which we're operating.
And that's right. And I do see that happen a bit where, it's kind of, you might make one appointment there and one appointment there. And so if you're just if there's just, women popping up kind of randomly around the place, well, the research says that the critical mass for, genders to feel kind of, psychologically safe and included is like 33%. So like one here and there kind of isn't doing, you're not getting the actual benefit of, true diversity of thought because one person is not going to feel as comfortable or confident in a situation if they're just one.
Well, the risk is and your research may have shown this. My suspicion, I don't have the evidence yet, but my suspicion from what I see is therefore people don't stick. Because they maybe don't feel psychologically safe, or they actually assimilate.
So then
so then you don't really get the benefit of diversity. That's right. So it's I think it's just being very mindful and acting with intent around what you're trying to achieve. I think one thing we haven't touched on, there's also the other risk that in the pursuit of getting, if you like, that broader element of diversity moving in the right direction, we target specific areas where we're going to, if you like, have the greatest chance of early success. The risk with that is we then end up, think about it in a functional sense, you can end up with functional teams that are 100% women.
That's right.
Or 90% women.
Yeah.
Now, the reality of that is you create the same environments and risks as you do with a male-dominated team, i.e. you just end up with a lack of diversity and different consequences of that. And so, all of these things, they're tricky. They're hard to navigate. And that's why I think we've just got to be mindful as how do we make sure we're not just working on emotion, thumping the table. I'm not saying I don't understand why people get emotional about it. I do. But we've actually got to make sure we back it up, I think, with a very carefully thought through systemic approach of real action.
Agreed. And one of my big areas of passion is, women in leadership, because ideally you tackle it from top down and bottom up, but, to make a big impact quickly, if you can get more women in leadership, which are the positions of influence, and decision making, you're going to kind of fast track your journey a bit. And I know that that's something which, whenever you join Sandfire, you've had great success at building more gender balance into your executive leadership team. Can you tell us a little bit about, how you did that and how that went?
Yeah, look, again, all of these things are learning and building on experience. And I think it's fair to say, my prior boss, direct manager of, I think, around a decade was Graham Kerr. And Graham's a very strong advocate of, obviously, gender equity. And he was someone, I think, moved very early to build balance in his teams. And so, I unashamedly benefited from that because I saw how an environment shifted and wasn't always perfect, but delivered, I guess, different outcomes in terms of how the team worked together and operated together. And so when I walked into my new employer's offices, and in fact, prior to that, when I was initially talking to directors on the board about the opportunity, what was really important to me is there was an immediate level of alignment around the benefits that diversity bring. Not about symbolism or tokenism, just a real belief that if you get inclusion right, diversity will follow, but you also need to make, very clear decisions around how you're going to achieve it, particularly at the top levels, because in that regard, it does matter. People look, it's the right thing to do, but there is a level of symbolism in that as well. In other words, well, you're saying all these things, do you really believe in it? And so, as I said, at the board level, it was very clear to me that there was a strong underlying commitment to gender diversity, and you can see that in the shape and construct of the board and the experience of the board. So coming in, great group of people, but it was fascinating that the first morning I walked in, there were into a leadership team meeting. It was 4 white Anglo-Saxon men. Again, very good people, but it was fascinating for me because it was a different dynamic. I can't really even describe it, just a different feel. And what I'm pleased to say today is that I think I've still got a very good group of people and a good team, but actually within 6 months of joining, I'd moved to having 50-50 balance on my direct reports by going out and, in my mind, getting the best people for the job. We brought Megan Jansen in to be our Chief Financial Officer, deep experience. I've been trying to find a way to work with Megan for years, and she's doing a great job. Kath Bozanic came across in sustainability. We elevated sustainability to the executive level of the organisation because I think that's where it needs to be in the world we live in and the world we're trying to create.
So you actually created that new executive role then? Because this is part of what I want to get to is how did you do that? So in that instance, you've created
the role, and that was, that was, in the formative discussions with the directors prior to joining around what are the things that are going to matter for us as we go forward, getting sustainability right, and we've absolutely got a lot of work to do there. We've been dealing with some difficult issues in that space more recently, but having Kath in that role's been really powerful, and then we actually brought the Chief Legal Officer and Company Secretary onto the executive as well.
Awesome.
Because again, I think in the world we live in, and actually it may have always been the case, it's pretty important to have your Chief Legal Officer around the executive table, and so Victoria Twiss has come into that role, and so with the one change with Megan coming into the CFO role, those two new roles which were envisaged prior to joining, we now have a 50-50 balance, and
awesome.
And, at times it leads to challenging discussions.
As it should.
As it
the
should.
point.
That's the point. Yeah.
So, because the reason that I'm probing is because, one of the big kind of, I guess, objections that I hear is, yes, I'd love to, but I've got like a really stable board, or I've got a really stable like executive team. So like, how do I make that change? So it seems like, aside from, if people self-select out or whatever the case may be, and being really deliberate in that appointment, it's, the other answer is create the bloody roles.
Yeah, well, oh, look, I mean, it's interesting. I've not heard that before, and I don't know the specific scenario, so I'm not judging it. But my high level perspective would be, or observation, I'd rather drive change from stability than instability. I use way too many sporting analogies in life. I think of the Australian cricket team. When you have incremental change through generations, it's very powerful. When you have that, the 3 stars all resign on the same day, or they all finish up and retire, that's a really hard, you have a rebuilding phase. So my argument would be, if you've got stability, what a wonderful thing. So how do you drive change from stability? Because in a way, again, I don't know the specific scenario, but if you're saying, well, stability, I've got it, why do I want to? Well, so really, are you saying that you want to wait till you have instability and chaos before you drive change? Yeah. I'm not sure that follows.
Yeah, that's a really good, I hadn't actually thought about that, but that's a really good perspective on things. I wish we could we could go on for hours here, but we're actually, time is flying by, and I just want to kind of wrap things up with, looking ahead for you and at Sandfire. What are some personal goals or aspirations you have, on the journey to gender equity, and what are some, if plans in place to achieve those?
Look, I think you've got to believe that 40-40-20 is achievable in every aspect of the business. So it's depth and breadth. So we're a long way from that. I think, we've achieved that level at our board. We're at that level within my direct reporting group. We've got a very, very healthy level of diversity in our Perth head office, and actually relative to general gender diversity in the locations we operate of Botswana and Spain, we're very well positioned, but there's a lot more we can do. I think, for me, it's that conversation we had about the building blocks that get built systemically into your business that will not only enable greater levels of diversity to evolve over time, most importantly create, we call it the inclusive culture that values diversity.
Love it.
That's the work we have to do. We're going through a major change of building broadly across our organisation the systems, process, policies, procedures, standards that actually set the company up for longer term success and enable it to grow as an emerging global company. That's really what we're doing now to enable hopefully these things to be fostered. And one of my key beliefs is we need to be very careful to dictate how that looks and feels in different cultures. So in my mind, when I'll be really pleased, and it may be in my time or hopefully, in a successor's time, if we set things up properly, these things persist, that you'll be able to go into Spain, you'll be able to go to Matza, you'll feel it's a Sandfire operation because of the core elements that you can see, but actually it will be deeply Spanish because we celebrate that it's a Spanish mine. And the same will be true in Botswana, that we're not trying to recreate an Australian mine in Spain. I don't think that will work. It's really about that foundational work. I wish I could say it's more exciting than that.
No,
but it's that foundational work to put the building blocks in place that enable these things to thrive in a sustainable way.
Love that. And yeah, I don't think it should be like an Aussie mine in Spain or an Aussie mine, in Botswana. Like, yeah, it wouldn't work, would it? So no. It's kind of like, it sounds like you're already aware of, the other aspects of diversity, and, you're doing some amazing work on the gender piece. And then, yeah, it's kind of integrating that, that cultural lens. And yeah, you're not trying to put, square pegs in round holes. You're trying to, take the best bits of the core of the company, but it should be, it should represent the community in which it serves and operates, right? It should have that.
That's really, for me, it's this It's this belief that, yes, we have an overarching sort of cultural series of traits and characteristics, but actually don't be fearful of subculture. Recognise there are subcultures within teams, within offices, and clearly across countries. And actually, you've got to find a way to embrace those, because that will actually support inclusion and diversity in any case. And, you know, we know that Australia's corporate landscape has a myriad of examples of embarking overseas and trying to implant the way of working that delivers success, only to be unsuccessful because it didn't work in different environments. And, you know, you go into southern Spain and it's beautiful, in Andalusia, not far out of Sevilla. You probably know the area. And, I mean, it's beautiful, but their way of life is beautiful. To believe you're going to fundamentally change the way they've been living for thousands of years through different work practices is probably naive. So how do you work with it? Yeah, that's really where my focus lies at the moment, is how do we create that environment? How do we foster it through having the right systems and processes? You know, again, recognising that's not a 1 year journey. It's a long-term process, which means you need to stay really committed. Awesome. You need to know where you're going and stay really committed.
I'm going to have to ask you to come back because we haven't got to half of the things I wanted to ask you, and I really would love to hear, you know, how that is going. But for now, thank you so much. As always, love the chat, love the insights. Keep up the amazing work and embrace that gender equity advocate, because I can tell you, I work in this space and you are. So thank you for that, and we'll definitely have to get you back.
Thanks, Ash. I really appreciate your kind words. Good to see you again.
Thank you. That concludes another episode of Voices of Gender Equity, Real and Raw Stories of Impact. I hope this conversation has sparked a passion, revealed new insights, and inspired you to take action in the pursuit of gender equity. Remember, change begins with each one of us. So until next time, keep raising your voice, keep championing equity, and keep making a difference. This is Ashley McGrath signing off from Voices of Gender Equity, Real and Raw Stories of Impact.